inspirational to be here with Victoria, who is the reason I adopted a vegan diet 24 years ago, and also to follow Nick. I have read this book now 3 times. I read it in galleys, and then I read it when it came out, and then I read it again. And I had done about 20 debates on college and university campuses at the time in which I read Nick's book. And I read the book, and I immediately revised the opening and the closing and a lot of the rest of my presentation. And I emailed him a link to the presentation and said, give me your comments. And he gave me his comments, and then I revised it some more. And so it is. I can't recommend the book highly enough. I hope that everybody will read it and adapt your activism appropriately. This talk is called Effective Animal Advocacy. I've been a vegan for 24 years, so I've been talking about veganism for 24 years. As Victoria mentioned, I was in charge of activism at PETA for 15 years. And Matt Ball at Vegan Outreach and I, some years back, we were chatting about all of the things that we had done wrong as animal activists over the years. And we started writing articles about that, and we were getting positive feedback on the articles. And then we decided to write a book about that, which is called the Animal Activist Handbook, which is also available. And this talk is sort of a very short distillation of some of the messages from the book. And it is based in some of the stuff that Nick talked about. The power of effective advocacy and ineffective advocacy is the difference between suffering for animals and non-suffering for animals. So you as a vegetarian or a vegan save about 100 animals a year, right? So that's you. You have one effective interaction on the basis of the fact that you're wearing a t-shirt and somebody asks about it, and you convince them to adopt a vegetarian diet. You have just doubled your lifetime efficacy as a vegetarian or a vegan. So everybody I know who is a vegetarian or a vegan, we feel fantastic about that. And we should, right? Every time we sit down to eat, we're casting our lot with the oppressed and against the oppressor. Every single time we sit down to eat, we are living the values of compassion and mercy and justice, and that is fantastic. It can feel even more fantastic and is deeply empowering to think about the fact that every time we convince somebody else to adopt a vegetarian or a vegan diet, boom, in that moment, we have doubled our efficacy. We have doubled our entire lifetime of good as a vegetarian or a vegan. Our activism has doubled that. So you wear a t-shirt and somebody asks about it, boom, you're at 200. You put a bumper sticker on your car or the back of your laptop, and you're sitting in a Starbucks with the bumper sticker on your laptop. Somebody asks about it, you give them some farm sanctuary literature, they adopt a vegetarian or a vegan diet. Boom, you again double your lifetime advocacy. You go out and you pass out leaflets. You can give away hundreds of leaflets in an hour at a metro stop. And you can, in an hour, exponentially increase your positive impact as a vegetarian or a vegan. So the difference between being effective and being ineffective, so if your conversation is ineffective or you don't do these things, it's sort of a sin of omission, right? If we're not being active, if we're not doing the little things. So just to reiterate what Nick said, we as activists, just like Charlie Sheen needs to be able to figure out where to get the best cocaine, and just like doctors need to do 5 years of schooling, we as animal activists should be studying how to be as effective as we possibly can be. Who here has heard somebody say, well, you're killing the broccoli as a vegan, or some variant on that? Who here has heard, well, what about abortion? Who has heard, well, God put them here for us, right? Yeah, there are certain things, there are about a dozen things that meat eaters ask us, or that they say, and if we do not have practiced responses, if we do not know how best to interact with people in those moments, we are letting down the animals for whom we are supposed to be a voice. And similarly, if we're not doing the reading and doing the research and becoming conversant, that is the difference between convincing people to adopt a vegetarian diet and not convincing people to adopt a vegetarian diet. So I do hope people, if you're not comfortable with public speaking, every community has a Toastmasters. If you're still at college or university, take some public speaking classes, take some psychology classes. I hope you will read Nick's book. I hope you'll read my book. My book is called, the book Matt and I wrote, it's called The Animal Activist Handbook. It really could be called, all the stupid things that Matt and I did over decades as vegans and how you can learn from them. And because that's really what it is. It's us sitting down and saying, well, there's a stupid thing that we did for 15 years as vegans. You know, we should suggest to people that they not do that. And I'm going to talk about 8 of them. The first one is always be courteous. So who here has been like sitting at a dinner table and somebody says, well, why aren't you eating your grandmother's ham? Right? And who here has, in response to that, said, shut up? You know, or some variant on, you're really an animal killer. You know, who has been unkind in that situation? I was unkind in that situation, and it's not helpful. Or we've been past one that probably everybody. Who here has been to a demonstration? And of you, put your hand down if you have not seen an activist be unkind to somebody. You know, why don't you get a job? Shut up, you fat cow. So, I mean, we're laughing, but it's true, right? I mean, oftentimes activists are unkind, and you can justify it, right? You can rationalize it. They started it. He was a jerk to me, so I was a jerk back. And, but the question that we have to ask ourselves, as I think Nick humor comes so well, is what would the pig in the gestation crate want us to do? So not what can we rationalize, not what's right even, not what is going to make me feel most good or most moral, but what's going to be most effective in that situation. And I can tell you that, you know, my wife and I go out and pass out leaflets about an hour a week, at least, sometimes more when we have time. And I can tell you that we used to, if somebody was mean to us, we would be mean back. And now when somebody says something unkind, I say, you know, have a great day. Or, you know, thanks for stopping, or thanks for interacting, or just, you know, something along those lines. And most of those people just keep walking. But a surprising number of them will come back and take a leaflet, or the people who say, I love meat. And I say, well, this is for you. And people will laugh and they'll take a leaflet. Now, you know, maybe 15% will laugh and take a leaflet, but, you know, when I would say, you look like you like meat, nobody would laugh. And nobody would take a leaflet. And it's exponentially bad, actually. It's not just that you had somebody who might have been convinced who you just turned off. It's also that person is going to later, when somebody says, you know, I'm thinking about going vegan. They're going to go, vegans are surly and mean. And they're not going to say, I started it, right? They're just going to go, I'm this vegan guy and he was mean to me. And so it's not just that you lose that person, but you lose all of that person's friends. It's even if Frankenstein is coming down out of the castle, you are, excuse me, sir, but you look a little lost. Perhaps I can be of some assistance. In every instance, we are kind rather than unkind. The second one is, you are, as Cole Porter said, you are Mahatma Gandhi. You are the tops. So some people, I have heard vegan speakers say and write that if you were at that dinner table and somebody says, why aren't you eating, you know, your grandmother's turkey, that the proper response is, I would prefer not to talk about that. That is my personal decision. And you know, you don't want to interact in that moment. And I think that's probably not the time to, you know, launch into a vegan diatribe with the turkey on the table. I mean, and it would be right, you know, it would be reasonable. You could justify, they say, why aren't you eating the turkey? And you're like Jesus in the temple, right? Boom! Over goes the table. You brood of animal killers! Right? You could justify that. You know, you think about the turkeys here and what they're going through, and that's a perfectly reasonable response. Not an effective response, probably. But we should have something practiced to say. Right? We shouldn't say it's a personal decision, because to the pig in the gestation crate, it's not a personal decision. So we want to say what's effective. I find that something like, you know, I don't want to talk about that right now because the, you know, turkey's right here on the table, but I think if you met these animals at this farm sanctuary that I went to, if you saw how they were slaughtered, that you wouldn't want to support it, and I'd love to talk to you about it later. And this does a couple of things. One is it raises the moral issue. Two is it bonds with them as somebody who's compassionate. And three is everybody at the table who is like, oh God, Bruce and Greg are about to get into, about to take over. You know, suddenly you're the good guy. Greg, you know, your Uncle Greg, who's a real person, provokes you, and you were like raising the moral issue, well, sort of not raising the moral issue. So you are the good guy. And then later you can talk to Greg about it. That's Dorothy Day, founder of the Catholic Worker Movement, and also has no reasons to apologize. So this is a movement for compassion, and we should not be apologetic about being part of a movement for compassion. Good-looking guy, huh? That's me. And looksism is an ism. You know, looksism, bias on the basis of how somebody looks, is an ism. It's a bias, and it's not fair. But I'll tell you, it's not an ism in the same way that speciesism is an ism. It's not an ism in the same way. If I, as Nick was talking about, can go from looking like, you know, Jesus or Charles Manson to looking like I want to draft George W. Bush to run again. It's not fair, it's not right, it's not good. But to the pig in the gestation crate, my willingness to put, you know, my desire to look like Jesus on hold to be more effective is absolutely the right decision. And there is study after study after study about the fact that even among countercultural looking people, like they do the study, they ask people, if you're sitting behind a Lexus or sitting behind a VW Bug, who do you honk at first when the light turns green? Almost everybody says neither. Some people say they honk at the Lexus, and almost nobody does. It's like 90-10. People sit behind the Lexus. Sometimes they're like 2.5 minutes sitting behind the Lexus. Or the jaywalking study. So, you know, you have the person in the construction uniform and the person in the suit in New York City jaywalking, you know, walking across at a don't walk, and it's like 95 to 5% people following the person in the suit and not the person in the construction uniform, and it's everybody. It's even the people in the construction uniforms. It's even the people in the VW Bugs. So the more mainstream we look, the more effective we're going to be for animals, and consequently, the vastly more efficient we're going to be for the pig in the gestation crate, the hen in the battery cage. The power of creating opportunities. If you have an I'm with stupid t-shirt, or an Abercrombie and Fitch t-shirt, or a Metallica t-shirt, you know, Abercrombie and Fitch, Metallica, and stupid don't need your advocacy. Animals need your advocacy. And the power of, you know, this is the power of social norming. You know, the more times people see other people in animal rights t-shirts, the more animal rights seems normal and mainstream. And if you're wearing one that's a conversation starter, all the better. So these are, you know, vegan people will say, and it's got farm sanctuary, people will say, what's farm sanctuary? And you have the opportunity to actually talk about the individual animals. And a lot of people will say, what's vegan? You have the opportunity to talk about that too. Or vegans save the world. It's a cute, fun, interesting t-shirt, and people will ask about it. And it imprints over and over and over the idea of veganism, the idea of animal rights, gives you opportunities to talk with people, and in that moment, you have the capacity to, boom, change somebody's entire life and save vast numbers of animals. It takes no time on your part. You can save vast numbers of animals. If you do have a little bit more time, I hope that you will join one of the walks for animals, or the sleep-in for animals if you're not near one. There are 40 of them, and again, walkforfarmanimals.org. Also an opportunity to tell people about Farm Sanctuary while raising money for us. You know, look at this great group. This is the weekend that I went to. This is one of the animals that I met. She represents all of these other animals. Apparently, according to Nick, you don't want to tell them about all the other animals, just tell them about one. But in any event, if you have a little bit more time, in the same way that a lot of us have a TV show that we generally don't miss, or you know, we make sure that we get our fitness workout in every day, you know, we want to make sure that we are prioritizing and putting some significant time into animal activism. One of the best things to do is teaching cooking classes. Because for a lot of people, the reason they're not eating a vegan or a vegetarian diet is it's not easy, it's not convenient, they don't understand what they're going to eat. And so even if it's eating more animal product-free foods and not going completely vegetarian or vegan, you know, 2 people eating half as much meat from the perspective of the pig in the gestation crate is the same as 1 person who goes completely vegetarian. You're helping people substitute meals by teaching cooking classes, and you don't have to be a professional chef. You just have to like to cook. To teach a cooking class in your local Whole Foods or your local Whole Foods or your local co-op, they will give you space and they will advertise your cooking class. Lots of other things that you can do on our website, farmsanctuary.org. Click on the activist team and scroll down. Lots of things you can do to raise these issues in your community. This is probably the most controversial thing that I talk about. Not the most important, but pretty important. And I think the cat food question got at this. So, personal purity ahead of effective modeling. I've been a vegan for maybe 15 years before I realized that in the less than 2% category where it says, mono and diglycerides, that I don't really need to write to the company and find out if they're of vegan origin. And that in fact that can be, I go to Minnesota a lot, sort of rural communities in Minnesota, and I would go out to eat with my relatives, and they have a veggie burger on the menu, and I'd say, what's in the veggie burger? This woman from Wayzata, Minnesota is like, what do you mean it's a veggie burger? What's in the veggie burger? And I'm like, vegetables are in the veggie burger. Well, can you bring me the box? The box comes out, I read the box, okay, it's vegan. What's in the bun? Can you bring me the bag? I want to read what's in the bun. Less than 2% in the bun is away. I'll have the iceberg lettuce. And there are two things about that. I mean, the first thing is that the average American eats probably 60 or 70 fish, 30 to 35 chickens, 1 turkey in a year, 1 turkey, 1/3 of a pig, 1/10 of a cow, and 1/30th of a dairy cow is your responsibility. The amount of suffering in the less than 2% category, if it says, whey or butter or something, it's about a gazillionth of an animal's suffering. But in that moment, you have said veganism is flipping impossible to whoever is with you. So what you really need to do in those sorts of situations is call ahead and find something that you're comfortable eating. And make sure, and then when you're eating it, make sure that you're excited about eating it. And as I think Chris said yesterday, and it's absolutely true, all of these sit-down restaurants will make something for you. So if there's something, if you can't find something that you're comfortable with, they will make pasta with spaghetti sauce or something like that. But in order to be personally pure, in order to root out a gazillionth of an animal suffering, I was alienating everybody at the table and possibly causing thousands of animals who I could have saved by making veganism seem reasonable, who I could have saved, I was alienating. And the reality to this also is the iceberg lettuce probably had more animal suffering in it than the less than 2% whey. Who here eats exclusively organic food? Yeah, especially in a crowd like this, there are usually a few people who eat exclusively organic food. Are you eating exclusively veganic food? I mean, I've never met anybody who eats exclusive. If you're eating exclusively organic food, there's animal fertilizer involved in that organic food. If you're eating any non-organic food, pesticides and herbicides kill songbirds, they kill insects, and the pesticides and the herbicides on the iceberg lettuce cause more suffering than the less than 2% whey. Veganism isn't an ingredient list. It's not a personal purity contest. I don't know how many people saw that level 5 vegan concept. I didn't agree there. We seem delusional, the point at which we turn it into a personal purity contest. And we become counterproductive in our efficacy. So animal ingredients A to Z, remarkably, they asked me to write the introduction, the animal ingredient, the second edition of Animal Ingredients A to Z. My introduction says, throw away this book. Not exactly, but pretty much. And they printed it. So the point of that is don't get animal ingredients A to Z. If you are wiping out everything that is obviously not vegan, you are doing more than 99% of the good, and the power of your example is doing even exponentially more good. For a lot of us, my wife and I, the idea of consuming any animal ingredients is like just disgusting aesthetically, and so we actually are label readers, but not in public, not with non-vegans. And we do it on our own time, and it's counterproductive to do it in another way, in my opinion. If you want to get me started on honey, come corner me in the in the corner. But anybody who eats almonds or tomatoes or potatoes, you're killing more honeybees than eating honey directly.
Can you expand on that, please?
When you tell a non-vegan that vegans don't eat honey,
more information.
Can you expand on that a little, please?
Sorry. Fantastic book called, fantastic book, a fantastic documentary movie called The Vanishing of the Bees. Absolutely spectacular about colony collapse. But the vast sort of bee factory farming is done for pollination. It's not done for honey. And this isn't to say don't eat vegetables and fruits. It's to say that the negative involved in telling non-vegans that we don't eat honey, which is so alien to everybody I've ever, this is what Nick talked about getting people part of the way rather than asking them to go all the way. If you ask somebody to go from standard meat eater to not eating honey, they will just completely shut down, right? It's just that the vast majority of people just aren't going to do it. And it is so different from talking about the farmed animal issues that it becomes really alienating. And it is also, it's both in the category of you are not going to be as effective in saving animals, but it's also in the category of it's a little bit delusional, because it pretty much rules out eating anything at that point. And veganism is not about personal purity, it's about doing the psychological analysis and figuring out how we can save the maximum number of animals. And I'm convinced, and I could do a 30-minute talk on honey, so I'm going to sort of leave it there, but I'm convinced that making honey a public litmus test for veganism is both counterproductive for bees, and it is counterproductive to helping animals. Like, you do not cause more bees to suffer loss. For about a decade after I adopted a vegan diet, I wouldn't eat with meat eaters. I would not go to the family gatherings, the Thanksgiving gathering or the Christmas gathering or whatever. And again, that's rational and reasonable. I mean, the alternative that's rational and reasonable is to go and overturn the tables and denounce them. But not effective. What that did, if you do eating together and you do a Google image search for eating together, like a gazillion photos of people eating together. It's like a really big deal for people, the idea of community dining. Eating is what we do second after sleeping, right? So it's a really big deal. If you boycott those meals, it makes veganism and animal rights seem, antisocial and really, really hard. So what I suggest that you do, unless you're going to break down crying, which is a reasonable response to, the table, in which case don't go, because that's worse. But if you can pull it off, bring some fantastic vegan food, be upbeat about the vegan food, and then when all the carnivores devour your vegan food and you don't have anything to eat, sort of tease them and don't get angry and cry about that. But make sure that you get your fill before you bring it, because they will eat all of your good vegan food. But that's a really good opportunity to talk to people about the fact that veganism is easy and vegan foods are tasty. So don't boycott the meals, go to the meals, be upbeat, have the conversation to some degree. This is the most effective and the most important. This is the thing that has transformed my activism. So Socrates was killed for influencing and corrupting the youth of Athens. And he didn't do it by browbeating them into believing what he believed. He did it by asking them questions and helping them to see that they already agreed with him. That's true of us too. 97% of Americans believe that animals should be protected from abuse. 97% of Americans, according to Gallup, believe that animals should be legally protected from abuse. 97% of Americans don't agree on anything, right? Except that animals should be legally protected from abuse. Even the libertarians think there should be laws to protect animals from abuse. We've won the argument. We just have to figure out how to have the discussion. It's not even win an argument with a meat eater. We've won the argument with the meat eater. Everybody agrees animals should be protected from abuse. They just haven't thought that much about it. We have science on our side. Darwin told us that other species of animal have the same range of emotions that human beings do. Richard Dawkins, the foremost living evolutionary biologist, he points out other species of animal, they're made of flesh and blood and bone, just like we are. They have the same 5 physiological senses that we do. They have the same sort of cognition that we do. They have the same range of emotions that we do. He calls them our evolutionary cousins, right? We've won the scientific argument. There's no longer any dispute about the fact that other species feel pain in the same way and to the same degree that we do. And we've got the intuition argument, right? There is no reasonable response that explains how it's any different to eat Gracie, the world's most perfect cat, or to eat Beaky, one of the world's most adorable chickens. There's no rational argument that can answer how there's a difference between eating Fiona, and isn't she flipping cute, or eating Chompers, also flipping cute. There is nothing anybody can say because there is no cogent argument for how there's any difference. And yet the vast majority of people in society will not eat Gracie, no matter how adorably cute she is, or Chompers, and yet they will eat animals like Beaky and Fiona, and just to get the full adorableness of it. And yet, if they're sitting down to eat and they're eating meat, they're paying people to do that. So the Socratic conversation, to me, boils down to no question anybody asks, responding to the simple fact that if you are eating meat, you're paying people to do things that you wouldn't do personally. So it used to be somebody would ask me why I'm a vegetarian, and I would say, thank you so much for asking. Animals on factory farms suffer miserably. It's just one example. They cram 30,000 chickens into these massive sheds. Each chicken has about this much by this much space for their entire life. They're cooped in their own excrement for their entire life. They have these hideous breast blisters. It's really awful. I see it. Then they cram 6,000 animals on the back of these transport trucks. They're so big that we're sometimes as quickly as they would naturally. 6,000 on the back of these transport trucks. They're just slow. When I take a breath, the other person runs for cover. Argument is powerful. It works for some people. But it works a lot more effectively if we start off with, we channel Socrates. Somebody says, why are you a vegetarian? You say, thanks for asking. Are you a vegetarian? Which is a useful question to have answered, as we go into that discussion. And then we try to get to a point at which we're having a conversation with that person about, would you slit chickens' throats open? Almost everybody says no to that question, unless it's, them or the chicken. But no, it's not you and the chicken on the desert island. It's you and the chicken and a whole bunch of vegan foods. Do you eat the chicken? For most people, the answer is no. They won't slit the chicken's throat open. So how does why do you think it's acceptable to pay people to do things that you wouldn't do personally? Everybody understands that the mercenary is no more culpable in a murder than the person who pays them to commit the murder, right? And so this should be an easy argument for us. Percy Bysshe Shelley said in explaining his vegetarianism, he said, I want no part of anything I can't write a pleasant poem about. I'm not a poet, I can't write a pleasant poem about anything. But I like the concept. Every aspect of getting vegan foods to the table, everybody can participate in. There's nothing inherently immoral about anything having to do with beans, grains, fruits, and vegetables, getting them to the table. There's nothing that anybody's going to recoil at having to participate in. And yet every aspect of getting animal foods to the table is morally problematic. And at its heart, most people don't want to slit animals' throats open. And that's the conversation, except in a conversational way. And that also gets people, they're not sort of passive receptacles of your wisdom, but it's actually a conversation that you're having with them. And like Socrates, you're helping them to see that in order to have moral integrity, they simply need to align the beliefs they already have with their actions. Because nobody supports this abuse. And so we're not trying to, and any question they ask, well, God put animals here for us to use. I used to think that too. What do you think about factory farming? Well, I'm opposed to factory farming. Well, what do you think about paying people, any question? Well, plants feel pain, don't they? Really, do you think plants feel pain? Most people, when they start thinking about it, well, I guess they don't. So do you support laws to protect animals? Everybody says yes. Do you think we should have laws against mowing your lawn? Everybody says no. Helping them to see, because nobody asks the question because they think it's stupid. They ask the question because they haven't thought that much about it. And rather than just giving them the answer, helping them to come to those answers for themselves. And that has been the thing that has flipped my activism. Instead of, just beating people over the head with the facts, actually having conversations with them, exponentially more effective. And the last thing that I want to say, and the last thing not to do, is to get mired in the suffering. The reality is we are making lightning speed progress by comparison to past social justice movements. The thing about these three images is that there are photos of these things, right? And Socrates said the unexamined life is not worth living 2,500 years ago. And we only got around to passing the 13th Amendment in this country, banning slavery, in 1865, so 146 years ago. For 2,350 years, we thought it was acceptable to hold other human beings as slaves. We only got around to giving children out of the mines about 100 years ago. We gave women the right to vote with the 19th Amendment in 1920, so 91 years ago. 91 years ago, it's historically nothing. And so, in about 150 years, we have done a 180 on some basic issues of how human beings interact with one another. We've been having a conversation 200 years ago about slavery or suffrage. saying, no, it's always been that way, it's in the Bible, you're not going to change it. You know, and yet, boom, it changed. And 150 years ago, absolute moral unanimity on some basic issues of how human beings should interact with one another. You know, we are making lightning speed progress compared to past social justice issues on animal welfare and animal rights. And I'm absolutely convinced with Leonardo da Vinci that the time will come when human beings will look back on the murder of other species with the same sort of moral revulsion that we have against the murder of human beings. You know, we've got science on our side, we've got ethics on our side, we've got philosophy on our side, we've got all of you on our side. And the challenge is for all of us to be as effective as we possibly can be so that we can bring about the animal rights revolution as quickly as possible. Thank you very much.